All right, welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Ganley, Client Partner Manager at Velocity Advisory Group, and I'm glad you're joining us today for this conversation on leading across generations in family businesses and what support can look like when the business and the family are intertwined. Family businesses are fundamentally different. Every decision has two sets of consequences: business consequences and family consequences. A strategic shift, a leadership decision, even a disagreement about direction, these don't stay at work in the same way they might in other organizations. I'm joined by Bob Weinhold and Molly Ryan, who spend a lot of time inside these dynamics with families. Bob is our partner overseeing our owner advisory and family business practice here at Velocity Advisory Group. And Molly is an executive coach who works closely with many of our family business clients. So Bob and Molly, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Let's start with what truly defines a family business, and that's multi-generational ownership, where ownership is more than equity. It's decisions that echo across family, employees, and even the broader community. It's a responsibility across time. So Bob, when we work with our family businesses, we try to get them to think in decades, not quarters. Why is that so important?
You did a great job setting up family business. I think the piece that most people don't understand is there's a large asset, whether that's the business or wealth or property, that goes from somebody that established it at a beginning time, and that's to move forward, not only through the next generation, but the generation after. And so, what I think many people don't have a clear understanding of is what are the pressures, what are the expectations that really, when you're born into a business, that you have growing up with your last name or with the community recognition or with a school aligned to who you are and what you've given. All of those two, three, four dimensions that you mentioned are so important in family businesses, as it's an enterprise that represents all the employees, it represents the community, it represents their market and their future generations. So it's really something that's multidimensional and very complex that is in consideration for many decades, both past and future.
I think that's so important. And Jennifer, something that I loved you brought up is that it goes when you bring in discussions into the boardroom with a family business, the context for those decisions are so nuanced. So understanding the context and really being in the position to help and support these family businesses, taking into account a lot of dynamics that go unspoken or unaddressed in the family boardroom is really important. And it's a unique and also exciting position for Bob and I to be in, to provide that level of support and be trusted guides and advisors as well.
So when you look across the family businesses that you work with, what pressures tend to show up the most consistently, even in the healthiest of families?
Super question. The senior generation that's alive, whether they're active and involved in the business or not, is we don't want to mess this up. Whatever happens, by the time that we're in the grave, we need this to be still in good shape and ideally set up well for the future. That middle transitional generation is, we feel the burden and the responsibility of the family pressures, the history. We want to help take care of our parents, aunts, uncles that are running it and support the tremendous pressure. But we also want them to feel really good about the work and the impact they've done and be able to enjoy their life a little bit, because they've usually thrown most of it into the business. And then all of a sudden comes knocking at the door when they go home and look around their own family room table at night. We have future generations that we want to create the right environment for them to come into to enjoy the blessings, the goodness of what we've created. We also understand it comes with a lot of pressures everywhere you turn.
So I really want to take a deeper look into exactly this topic, the idea of succession and then generational dynamics. And if we could shift our focus to that middle generation. So let's stick with them right now. Why is the middle generation at such a critical leverage point? And what pressures do they carry that the other generations before or after them might not see?
Molly, you want to start?
I think that every family business is different. So you can't put every family business in the same kind of trajectory or succession that we've seen with one. However, there are some commonalities. And I would say one of the biggest commonalities with that middle generation is that they're eager to participate and they're eager for transition and change. Where you have older generations who want to stick with the legacy and the values, and change can seem too disruptive for them. So in order for businesses to continue to grow, evolution and transition with healthy goals in mind that are shared between all those generations is so important. So having the generations agree on the overall goals and value system and allowing that middle generation to communicate and verbalize, like, we're not coming in trying to break down the structure that is being given to us. We're coming to help evolve it so this continues to grow at the pace and the legacy that we've had and we've experienced as a family business. So I would say that's kind of a commonality with that middle generation is they're dealing with a lot of transition, and they're also dealing with older generations that are holding on tight to well-established procedures and values. So it might look a little bit different, and they have those pressure points with the previous generations in terms of how do we keep this going.
The
So
middle
Jennifer,
can I jump in? The middle generation carries all the weight of the continuity. They've still got a lot of working life left. They've got to make sure that it's right for their kids to come up if they choose in the business. So they carry the weight of the continuity, but they often don't have the decision-making authority. One of the things that I've come particularly clear about in working with multi-generation family businesses over the last decade plus is that the decision authority and the emotional risk often happen in a very different place than where the problem seems to show up in the organization. And so as Molly's talking about a lot of those changes and the pressures of where those things show up in the organization, the middle generation carries that. They're supposed to fix it, but they don't have the decision authority to either hire or invest or divest an asset or go into a totally different line of business, even when they knew that's the best thing to do for continuity in the future.
So to look at the older generation again,
seniors,
I think that when succession is brought up, it can be perceived as more of an identity shift, a really big identity shift. So can you share what might be going on emotionally when someone kind of in that previous generation is being asked to shift what their role looks like?
I'm going to share it through an example. I had the great privilege of walking through a large manufacturing site with a senior owner of a couple generation business. And when this gentleman turned the corner, he was very benevolent. He was very well liked by everyone. And each time he passed a new stall, a new desk, a new counter, everyone lit up and had a handshake or a smile. And he was able to ask about them and their family, and they did with him. And for him not to be able to go into the office, for him to not be recognized, for him to not have the value and the good feeling of people coming up and asking for advice, and to leave that, left a large void for just feeling purpose and contribution. And when his dad was growing up, or when he was growing up with his father said, every day you're responsible to make the world better and put a smile on someone's face. And he grew up with that statement over and over again. And when you look at succession and he's pulled out of the building, he was sitting at home and had no way to fulfill what he was told from as young an age as he can remember.
That's a powerful burden to carry. And I think that these conversations about succession and transition, because they can be so sensitive, are sometimes, a lot of times, avoided. And families wait too long in some cases to really address them. And so what does that delay in having those conversations, those hard conversations, what does that cost both the business and the family?
Jennifer, before we move on, I just want to, Bob, you just said a word that I think is so important and can be a guiding light for that senior generation. And that is contribution. So redefining what contribution looks like for that senior generation, because if it is going into the office and having that connection with everybody behind their desks, how can you still have that sense of contribution at a different level? Which I think also, transitions well to the question that you're asking right now with that pinch point in terms of what does contribution look like with each one of the generations? And how are we supportive in redefining it and really stepping into a new evolved role of contribution? Because that's what's so unique about family business is that everyone's working for this larger system that they're personally invested in, their partners are personally invested in. This isn't a transactional business that might get sold down the road, like 2 years from now. This is long-term, like you said. We're thinking about decades. We're thinking about our children's children. So I do love that Bobby used the word contribution. I just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks. Jennifer, your question is on what happens when you wait? What's the impact? When families come to us, they're not often coming for a specific answer. They're coming for context, language, and understanding of how other families like themselves deal with these kinds of things. And so when that's prolonged, what happens in our own brain and in our own body and on our soul is we make assumptions. We assign meaning and intent to other family members doing something or not doing something. And so when the longer you wait, what happens oftentimes is that's interpreted as you don't care about me. You're not invested in me. You don't value my opinion. I had an 83-year-old matriarch who said to me that none of her children were ready to run and be on the board of directors for their company. And I said, well, help me understand this. And she said, they're just not ready yet. And I said, how old is your child that is the most ready? Well, she's 63 and she's been a CEO and she's sat on some of the most prestigious boards in the country. And I said, well, why is she not ready? And she said, she did something a long time ago and I just haven't been able to forget that. And the mother had never had a chance to approach her daughter with that past resentment and confusion. And so over many decades, it built this impasse where there wasn't competency assigned when yet all external factors led to the fact that she was very, very competent and capable. And so I think the delay is walls and assumptions and distance get built up to where this person said, gosh, what am I going to wait until I'm 65? And I'm not willing to tell my daughter she can't, which would have been the granddaughter. I'm not willing to tell her she has to be 45 to even get a company position. It's too long to wait. And so that's when the family long-term decade business starts to break down and you don't have continuity, which is a death nail to those organizations and the families.
And it too, it puts them in a position of reactivity, and it also diminishes the amount of options they have. So the longer that they wait to start the conversation and to start doing the work and understanding the intricacies of all the decisions that are being made and the involvement, it limits those younger generations from having the opportunities to learn and to understand and to be involved. And it puts them, when they get to a decision point, it does put them in a reactive posture, which doesn't help anybody.
So I want to follow up on that. What does it take to prepare the next generation? Not only prepare them, but prepare them well without forcing a one-size-fits-all path or timeline, since we know that every family is different and will handle this differently.
It feels like that could take 7 hours of discussion and we would just get the intro done. I'm really clear that that generational transition not only has to do with the folks that are in the business and in the family, but those that are in the family and not in the business, and spouses that are not in either. Molly does a lot of work with spouses of very successful family businesses that aren't in the direct operating company. And that, how they integrate into the family, how they understand things, how they're a part of the business, that is an education in a context that really can't be delivered necessarily by the family, because often when marrying in, it's expected that they already know that, but there's no education or no context. So Molly, in a moment, maybe you can comment on that. I think for the work that we're privileged to do with family members that are developing leadership competency and capacity, I look at it through the 4-room models that our good friends Josh Barron and Rob Lockenauer over at Banyan created, which is, what's the operating company understanding? How do you rotate through and really understand how your asset operates, how they make decisions, how they make money, what it's there for? What are board level decisions? And that can be for the operating company, but it can also be a family board. What are the complexities of how do you make ownership decisions? And how does the family benefit? And what's the family responsible for in terms of how they participate in each of the other 3 rooms? So most people grow up in the family business. They get a little bit by osmosis, but there's never some context or explanation by the family members as to what are the expectations. That's a challenging part. Jennifer, you and I work on helping those partner groups and families develop what are the expectations that they want to have for each other. What purpose are those? Do they get involved in equity and decision making? Do they get involved in compensation? All of those questions. So we provide a lot of context, and then we understand the organization, and we start to educate those individuals as to how the business and the family has set forth their expectations. Molly?
Yeah, I love that you brought up the 4-room model, because the work that I've done with Bob, you can see these light bulbs go off for these generations that are like, oh, this is clarity now. This is where I'm comfortable, but I actually do want to move into a different room, or I have no interest in moving there. So knowing where they are on the map provides us so much opportunity to verbalize all those expectations and those hopes and their dreams that they have, whether it's involved or stepping back. And that gives us and starts to form a pathway in how we can be supportive to them. And it also gives everyone around them. I love the Brene Brown quote, clarity is kindness. And if you know where you stand and where you're wanting to be involved or less involved. One of the quotes, Bob, you sent me that book and the Family Business Handbook. And one of the quotes that I love from there is not necessarily what strategic decisions are made. It's how, when you work with family businesses, it's how those are made. So what dynamics are you taking into account, and how are you supporting the whole entire family system to make a decision together, as opposed to one person making a decision and everyone following suit?
This is an area that I find really fascinating. It's just the family education piece. And we've worked with clients who families as early as, people as early as 12 years old are involved in certain meetings and are kind of required to attend them. And so what does that path look like? And, we've been with other families where it's required that they get a certain level of degree in an area before the business might be handed over to them, or some families require you to work outside of the business before you can work inside the business. And so there's a real complexity and a lot of choices to it, which is why I just find that particular work so fascinating.
You're right. Some families are very well structured, and they say, we want you to know who we are, enough about each of the operating businesses, philanthropy wise, where and what do we stand for? And by the time you're 18 or 21, if you're going to get benefits from the company in terms of equity or money or opportunity, we need you to demonstrate that you know what we stand for, who the people are, how our business works. We work with kind of one family that's 5 or 6 generations, and interestingly for them, they're not allowed to enter directly into the business, but the expectation is everyone meets once a year as part of their family gathering, and it's well over 100 people, and they participate in understanding the business meetings so that one day, even as a shareholder in a very large multi-generational business, they have the knowledge to be able to make good business decisions, as well as support the ethos of what their family has done for the community.
So I want to shift a little bit into prevention. I feel like the example we just gave, that family in particular, is very, very structured. And we touched upon earlier that a lot of families kind of avoid having hard conversations. And so proactive support seems optional until it's not, until a family is maybe in crisis. So what becomes possible when families start having the hard conversations earlier?
I would say, going back to, it creates more opportunities. If they have more time and they're presented with more opportunities, and especially like what Bob, you just shared too about that family, understanding the family narrative and really being tied to the family ethos is so important when you enter these discussions and you are proactive, and your younger generations can see a pathway of what level of involvement they want to have, or what do they need to supplement their dreams for being a part or for having boundaries with the family business. So I think like the sooner that they get on board with understanding that narrative and what the opportunities are, the less reactive they're going to be, and the more opportunities and time they have to be truly intentional and conscious with how they make decisions and their level of involvement and their understanding of family assets, which has been really eye-opening for me to see doing this work, is the understanding of the family assets, because it builds a sense of stewardship to how they're going to participate in this bigger picture. And it really lights people up and stimulates them in a way to participate in the overall family business system that maybe previously they weren't initiated to do.
Great answer, Molly. I'm going to tie part of Molly's answer back to something that you started with, Jennifer, which is things are involved in so many areas of all of life. And when I think of how do the decisions and getting involved with communication and learning how to have disagreements and tough conversations, when that's normalized early on in life, it's very important. Molly and I were brought into a family where all communication had disintegrated to the point they couldn't talk about anything. And it largely got severed over how a major business transaction, divestiture, was handled. And because of the lack of trust, it created such a disconnect that the family stopped communicating. So we started by building communication skills again from the ground up and helping normalize conflict. Family business is a full contact, hard sport where you get bruised. It's, sport, I don't say lightly, but it's when you're dealing with something that you can never get away from. It's 24/7, and it has the impact of all that's around you at all times. It's very difficult. And so some families minimize that stress and only choose to talk about the things that they have to talk about. And unfortunately, that often renders family only to talking about bad business problems or bad family members that aren't working out. And when that happens, all communication is considered hostile and difficult. So we try and normalize normal communications. Molly and I work with families to just have a weekly or a bi-weekly call that's just touching base, because it's building the communication knowledge. And Molly and I've sat in a family's living room before and said, it's more important in our estimation that you learn how to have conflict, how to move through it and make decisions. Yes, some decisions are very important, but we want you to have the skills so that you can make the small and the major decisions and still have Thanksgiving together without throwing the cranberry sauce across the table.
I think to your point, things like communication, relationships, trust between family members, in essence, should be viewed as assets, as strategic assets, right? And so how do you protect those, and how do you help families maintain them in practice?
Jennifer, I love that question because it's a muscle. And I think, Bob, you just hit it home too. Setting the expectation. It's not the avoidance of conflict that makes a family business or involvement in a family business healthy. It's actually the posture and approach you take together towards a family conflict, way through it, that creates a healthy, more strengthened bond with the family. So I do think it's setting those expectations. We are going to go through some rough waters together. And if we can come back to the core values that they've identified, whether it's respect, inclusion. I know, Bob, you like to talk about these: respect, inclusion, and what's your third one, Bob?
Likability.
Likability, the most important one. But when you go back to those core values as what you're taking into these conversations, it's that support that they have where they start learning and using and practicing those muscles in a way that then becomes autonomic. And so it doesn't prevent them from wading through the tough times together and coming out on the other side.
Yeah, briefly, Molly touched on one of those things that I've learned over time is that there's three kind of distilled elements that I often see: likability, respect, and inclusion. And sustaining multi-generation family businesses have at least two of the three. And the one that you can't compromise on is inclusivity. You have to be involved to be able to be aware. There are family members that don't really like each other. They're not going to spend any time out on the ball fields or hiking or on vacation, but they know how to include them in the meetings. And there are other families that don't like each other, but they really respect the knowledge of the other person. And so because of that respect, they're going to include them. But if you don't have at least two of the three, it makes it really hard to go on generation to generation.
So we talked a little earlier about trying to be more proactive and kind of preventing getting to a crisis point. So what are the signals that the window is open kind of before we get to a crisis or a near crisis point?
I think of that as terms of, are people interested in a growth mindset? I mean, that's a cliche term, but do people see the family and the business and their contributions as evolving? And if they're evolving and there's an understanding that things should always be changing and shifting a little bit, it's much easier to have the conversation. When things are in a fixed mindset, or this is the way we were told to do it, or we have to do it, it's really difficult to penetrate and change any of those systems and or the thinking and sharing of folks involved.
Yeah, I would say any family business can benefit from having that proactive approach to including and helping all the generations be on the same page.
If we can look a little bit more at support, Bob had mentioned earlier that families don't necessarily need an answer, or aren't looking for an answer, and it's more about support. So why does traditional advice kind of miss the mark when it comes to family businesses?
You want me to take it? That's a great question. And I think because most importantly, these families want to be understood. And I think a lot of times there is a level of skepticism if we come in and try to say, here's this formulaic approach for solving all of your problems. That doesn't get us very far. It's coming in and saying, like, we have a breadth of knowledge from working with a lot of families, but no one is in the exact position that you're in. And family businesses can be very much discreet in terms of how much they share. So there's a lot of trust that goes into us coming in and gently being there as a support to not only hear, but help them process. And again, going back to that working together, not necessarily like we'll have you guys all agree on the final answer by 5 p.m. this afternoon. That typically is never the goal. It's how do you guys learn to work together in a space and build a communication channel that's going to support you not only today, but 5 months down the road, 5 years down the road. So I would say it's a different approach to the support is very unique in the fact that we're helping them learn how to communicate and approach these things that will take them sustainably through many generations.
Great question. I'm going to jump in and take a moment to tell one of my favorite stories, which is myself and a colleague were flying to a town out west, and we were going to do some of our family business work. And my good friend in a different part of the plane doesn't exactly look like he is from this western town. And the passenger next to him said, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" And he said, "I'm coming out for business." That was the extent of what he said. And she said to him, "You don't look like you're from around here." And he said, "I'm not." And she said, "Would you like to know a little bit about who we are and what you'll find in the town?" And he said, "Sure." And this woman started to explain where the town is, how it came together, what are the major industries, what are some fun things to do. And at the end, she looked to him and said, "And if you have the good pleasure to meet a member of the such and such family, you'll really know who we are, because they are a part of what made this town and keeps the people in it." And the depth of that is incredible. And I think for me, it speaks to not a couple of dimensions, but the real profound nature that traditional thinking doesn't capture. I often say that if you're a member of a multi-generation family business, you should expect a few different handshakes. Every once in a while, you get the regular handshake that says thank you. You can sometimes get a pat on the back. Frequently, you get a point in the chest that says, "What have you done wrong?" And very often, you have, "Can you please help?" And the members of those family businesses in those communities don't escape that. They don't escape that at 6:30 in the coffee shop in the morning when they're going to get sandwiches and they run into somebody who's supported by their family. Either they've done them right and they can say, "Thank you for helping," or, "My mom's really sick. Do you think you could help out and let my dad off of work for a few days because he really needs to be with my mom?" Those are the kinds of things that you have to understand in a much larger context that often traditional thinking won't answer. And so we help with the sensitivity and the awareness of those multidisciplinary, multifaceted interactions and expectations from a very young age on.
So adaptability matters definitely more than a fixed framework in this space. And I think a lot of times your work with families is about, the progress is about helping them gain insights, right? Like we said, not because someone told them what to do, but they have ownership over their own insights and what's happening. So can you just share a moment or some examples where a family made progress because of the insights that they learned together or on their own through their individual coaching?
Bob, I'm thinking about the family that had gotten to a point where they no longer had any internal motivation to reach out and even just check in with each other, and how far that family has come through. They simply started, their number one goal was, we just want to learn how to talk with each other without getting completely inflamed from a lot of stuff that happened in the past. So I would say that's one of my most fulfilling interactions that I've had with in this opportunity, because at first it was just naming where they all were at, and them coming together, like, we're going to have to sacrifice or compromise a little bit on our hills that we so badly want to protect in order to get back to a place where we can have the internal motivation to talk to each other. And I mean, fast forward to 2 years later, not only are they vacationing and enjoying each other, they're looking at how to understand their assets in a way that can help their generation, and then their children and their children's generation. So starting really small and super focused, and being able to constantly bring them back to what is fruitful in terms of getting us to the goal, as opposed to what is old muscle memory that's not serving you, and trying to uncover and spin out or ruminate over past grudges, and constantly refocusing and helping them come up with a protected space for them to communicate that felt like they could start really feeling trusting each other. And now it's actually expanding out to other sides of the family, which is cool. It's a byproduct of them doing the work with themselves, which has been very fulfilling to see.
On that family, Molly and I often are folks that just reflect back the incredible progress that they've made, because they get very attached to the angst of when there's conflict and friction, and they frequently forget they're now talking to each other on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. One's back and working in the business in a way that they never imagined ever before. And they're talking to each other about things that they never could talk through before. And so we reflect back, not only do you have insights, you've taken these actions, and Molly and I point out what actions, and here's your result. So it may feel very fluid, but we reflect back an X-ray image or an MRI to say, action-wise, you've changed. You've changed your system and your family and your dynamics.
I think that's such a key role that the two of you play, because you might have to start kind of rebuilding the foundation, as you have with certain families, and families can lose sight of that. So they might not even be at a point where they can kind of make a major decision, right? Because they're so fractured or whatever the reason. So when we're focusing on what effective support really enables within families, what can families feel kind of quickly when it's not like, oh, we have to make this decision so we know kind of we're making progress because we made that decision? When you said now you've worked with this particular family for, 2+ years, it can be a long road. So if you can kind of reflect on that journey.
Well, I think maybe another example is important. There was strife in one of the families that we had, and it was about, are they being compensated in the right way? And they're a very, very large organization, measured with a B rather than an M. And in result, they were getting, as a employee of the company, they were getting average or less than middle market salary compensation for their roles, but they weren't having any other compensation, and they were getting no distribution. So as a process, we actually look at all the structure, because what happened was people felt like they were being slighted and they were being mistreated. So it became a family and an emotional and a value issue, but the structure of the system didn't allow people to be compensated, recognized, and valued in a way that felt good for their business, their family, and in the context of others. So for them, we put together something like an employee compensation, a family compensation committee. In others, it's how do you get a next generation involved in even a non-voting member on a board, so they get to see how companies and how other people are making decisions. Those are some things that can help create awareness and activity and engagement and access in a way that didn't happen before. And we have to frame that as, we're actually building your muscle to be a better owner, steward for the longevity of your assets and your family, rather than we're just trying to get a 30 or a 35-year-old person ready to take over the world. We're actually building their ownership knowledge and understanding as how do the family and other non-family executives work. Molly?
Bob, I'm thinking of that same family that you're mentioning, and just the powerful work that you have done with one of the members of that family that had an old, outdated narrative internally that was pigeonholing this person into some old decisions. And this person was coached and guided to make new ones and really challenge what an old, outdated version of themselves. And then you couple that with what Bob just said in terms of understanding the pay and compensation for the role that this person played within the family business. And that to me is like just an incredible integrative way for this person to be involved, be fairly compensated, and also change a hardcore narrative about themselves that was prohibiting them from excelling and being an active participant within the family systems and the structure. And it's interesting because I work with the partner, and other people around were also seeing these changes, and composure, poise, self-awareness, all of those things come into play in in a very important way when having those granular discussions, whether it's understanding the assets or advocating for different compensation. So yeah, I think it's that kind of full picture approach too that can be really helpful.
It's really fascinating to me, the work that we do with family businesses, because there is an educational component, like Bob said.
Mhm.
There is oftentimes a group component, but then there's also the individual side of things and
Mhm.
how they all kind of play off of each other to get the family where they want to go.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's just different about us as a firm is that we have expertise not in just one or two of the rooms. There's a lot of people that spend time just in working with the family, but don't seek to understand the complexity of the assets or the operating companies that they're working with. And so, as Velocity, we have real deep understanding of the operating assets and how to run management companies and that kind of stuff, but we also understand how do you cross over into the decision making in each of the rooms. And if you're a family member that's growing up and will have eventual participation or board responsibilities or equity or the primary decision making of the firm and the family, if you don't understand all of those areas, you're really limited and hamstrung. And what we find, not only in operating companies, is if you're not aligned from the middle or the bottom of the organization to the CEO, if that CEO is not aligned with the board and the board's not aligned with the owner and the family doesn't feel like the owners are representing what they want in the future, when that misalignment occurs, it's catastrophic across the organization, because usually what will happen is people feel very indebted to the company and to the family, so they'll stay there for a long time, but they can languish and it's not helpful for anyone. And so we try and help point out some of those inconsistencies along the way and make sure that there's dear and great alignment across all of the enterprise.
I think we may be coming up on our time together. So, if you could leave the audience with one message about support in family businesses, what would you want them to remember most from our conversation today?
I'll go
Well,
first. I would say start early, be proactive. The more knowledge that the more that we can support younger generations in terms of understanding the family business and being aware of themselves and how they want to participate and how they want to be involved, but also how do they want to be a good steward of all these opportunities that they have, and how can they contribute, and what lights them up and what stimulates them. I think that's at the core of what I love about working with these families, is that they have so many opportunities and resources, and sometimes it's overwhelming. They're just, they put their head down and stick to their one thing. But in reality, if we start having that conversation early, it doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like just an open landscape of opportunities for them. And it builds bonds and connections, not only with each other and their extended family, but their communities. And
mm,
that it's like that flywheel approach. Then they have a sense of purpose and a sense of value and contribution on a much larger scale than just their immediate family. The other thing I would love to say too is, and I know we talked about it a lot, is that each family is so nuanced.
mm,
So something that I love about Velocity's approach is that we take that into such great consideration and hold it with a sanctity, because it's so important to understand and get down into the weeds with these clients to make sure that they know that they're not just going to be treated paint by numbers the way that they might be treated elsewhere. It's something that it's the details, it's the customized approach, it's understanding all the intricacies. So, because sometimes those margins of growth are so small, but they have exponential benefits 5, 10 years down the road. So finding those ways to really leverage those small margins for big benefits is really important.
wow, great answer. Um, Stewardship is a really important word to me, and I think that's taking the blessings and the bounties that and the good fortune that people are given and trying to make the most of it, not only now but in the future. And family businesses really have stewardship at the center of where they are. And I think of the word architect. Many families are trying to figure out how to design their stewardship so that it goes on for decades, maybe 100 years. And so when I consider the work that I'm really privileged to do, family businesses don't fail or stay stuck because they lack answers. They're actually really good about a lot of answers, but they struggle or they experience the greatest strife when they don't have the space and the support and the context to know how to move through those things in a progressive way that allows them to carry their asset forward for the next decade plus.
So one final question. So say someone has been listening to us for the past 45-ish minutes and they're thinking, okay, this sounds like my family might need to have these conversations, or I want to explore my next steps. What would exploration look like for them in a way that feels both practical and respectful to the family system?
My answer is maybe not as direct. Molly and I are really focused on confidentiality and trust. And these families don't have a lot of trusted resources that aren't opportunistic, voyeuristic in ways that are exploitive at times or have had that experience in the past. So I would say be willing to have a 30-minute conversation with any one of the three of us on the screen. See if we seem like trustworthy and reasonable people by the questions that we ask and the perspective that we give. If that's the case, then it opens up for a greater discovery and a longer conversation. But we view our time with you and whomever's calling in as very sanctity, I think, as a word Molly used. We want to make sure that you're comfortable with who we are and where we come from and our thoughts before we ask you for anything or we prescribe something that we think you need without understanding at least part of your system. It's really important.
And I would say for you, Bob, I've worked with you now long enough to know sometimes your first step is just an exploratory visit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're not, and to our earlier conversation, you're not prescribing anything. It's quite adaptable, quite flexible, and it's really understanding the family and gaining the trust of the family before we even broach the topic of further conversations.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Molly, any final words from you?
I think that, yeah, you guys said it so well, because it's a customized and very nuanced approach. That exploratory call and understanding where they are, what their hopes and dreams and goals are, is the first step.
Goes back to that statement earlier where the decision authority and the emotional risk, which is often where the agita is, isn't the same place as where the problem is. Or the problem is creating all of this, but it's in some other place. And folks don't have the context. Molly and I, you, Jennifer, we can listen for a little bit, ask a few questions, and we probably can give some context as to where, how, and what other people have done with that before. That's what we do for work. It's what we're privileged to do and help families. And our greatest ability is to have an impact not only on today, next year, but for some of these folks, the guidance that we can provide really is for 10, 20, or 50 years of impact down the road. It's a special privileged place we are. Take it very seriously.
It certainly is. Well, thank you so much, Bob and Molly, for joining me today and walking me through leading across generations and the support that we can provide. So I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Hope everyone learned something and will take something with them.